On the quietest floor of the Bellweather Hotel, behind a cream-painted door that closed with a soft and courteous click, there was a linen room waiting to be counted. On the quietest floor of the Bellweather Hotel, behind a cream-painted door that closed with a soft and courteous click, there was a linen room waiting to be counted. It was not an urgent count. Nothing in the room was in danger of escaping, and none of the folded sheets had made plans for the evening. The pillowcases rested in their square stacks, the towels occupied their shelves with the settled confidence of small white clouds, and the blankets, being blankets, had arranged themselves into patient layers of wool. At 8:30, when the last trolley had rolled away and the corridor lamps had been dimmed, Mr. Vale arrived with a wooden clipboard, a sharpened pencil, and a cup of tea in a thick china mug. He was the hotel's keeper of household stores, a title that sounded grander than it was and pleased him for exactly that reason. His work tonight was to begin at shelf A, proceed in an orderly fashion through the alphabet, and discover how many useful rectangles of cloth the Bellweather possessed. The room smelled of cotton, lavender starch, old timber, and the faint mineral warmth left by the laundry presses. Somewhere in the walls a pipe gave a tick. Mr. Vale set his tea on the desk beneath the clock, wrote the date at the top of the inventory sheet, and listened for a moment to the comfortable silence. He liked a room that expected nothing more remarkable than accuracy. Then he drew a neat line beneath the date and began. Shelf A held single bed sheets, flat rather than fitted, each one folded to the same broad dimensions. There were 4 stacks on the upper shelf and 4 below, with blue paper labels tucked beneath their edges. Mr. Vale counted by placing 2 fingers lightly on each folded hem. 12, 24, 36, 48. His pencil moved with a dry little whisper. The sheets were cool beneath his fingertips, smoother at the center and slightly firmer where the hems met. They had been washed many times, and the repeated washing had given them the agreeable softness that new cloth could only promise. A new sheet was all potential, crisp and faintly proud. An old hotel sheet had learned its occupation. It knew about tucked corners, open windows, breakfast trays, afternoon naps, and the moonlit shape of a sleeper's foot. Mr. Vale did not think of particular guests, for that would have made the count unnecessarily complicated. He thought instead of the rooms themselves, narrow room 14 with its view of the courtyard pump, room 22 where the wallpaper showed tiny green ferns, and room 31 beneath the eaves, whose ceiling sloped so gently that tall guests often ducked even where they did not need to. Each bed would receive a sheet, and after some quiet interval the sheet would return through the laundry, warm and pressed, to this shelf. It was a slow circulation, like water in a decorative fountain, only more absorbent. He counted the second row, checked that the total was divisible by 12, and made a modest tick in the box marked condition satisfactory. The Bellweather had opened in 1886, though the linen room was younger by several decades. Originally, according to a framed plan kept in the manager's office, this space had been called the upper housemaid's closet. It had contained coal scuttles, candle ends, hearth brushes, spare jugs, and a mysterious item listed as one japanned box. Mr. Vale had once looked up japanning in a reference book and learned that it described a glossy black finish intended to resemble Asian lacquer. This was precisely the sort of fact he enjoyed, complete enough to satisfy curiosity, yet unlikely to alter the course of anyone's day. The coal scuttles had disappeared when central heating arrived, the candles had retreated before electric bulbs, and the jugs had yielded to private bathrooms, but cloth remained. Cloth was adaptable. It could be bleached, hemmed, patched, monogrammed, folded, unfolded, and folded again. The pine shelves were painted mild gray, their edges rounded by decades of baskets. On one upright, a housemaid named Elsie had penciled her initials in 1934. Mr. Vale had never erased them, they had waited so politely that removing them would have seemed officious. He moved one stack half an inch to the left, revealing the small EH, then put it back precisely where it had been. The clock above the desk advanced with a restrained click, and the tea released a thread of steam that smelled faintly of bergamot. Shelf B contained double sheets, which required a broader reach and a slightly slower count. Mr. Vale lifted each bundle of 6 to make certain no stray pillowcase had slipped between the folds. Laundry, despite its reputation for passivity, had a mild talent for migration. A hand towel might arrive among bath sheets. A table napkin could spend a week in the kitchen cloth cupboard. Socks, though the Bellweather did not inventory guest socks, were famous throughout the civilized world for wandering. The double sheets behaved well tonight. Their stacks were square, their selvages aligned, and their small woven hotel marks all faced outward. The mark was a simple bell inside an oval, worked in pale gray thread near one corner. In earlier years the emblem had been embroidered by hand. Now it was woven into the cloth at the mill, a change that had saved many hours while depriving future linen keepers of the pleasure of comparing individual bells. Hand embroidery had allowed for bells that leaned, bells with uneven handles, and one celebrated bell that appeared to be wearing a hat. Mr. Vale had placed that old sheet in the hotel archive, inside an acid-free box marked Textiles, Miscellaneous. The words gave the bell a dignified retirement. He counted 60 double sheets, then found 6 more on the lowest shelf. Kneeling on the braided mat, he noticed the quiet variations of white, cream where cloth lay in shadow, silver at the fold, warm ivory near the lamp. White was never merely white in a linen room. It borrowed from wood, evening, dust, lamplight, and the blue paper labels. He wrote 66, underlined it once, and rose carefully, accompanied by the faint creak of his knees. Next came pillowcases, which were stored in sets of 10 with a narrow cotton tape around each bundle. The tapes had once been pink, according to Mrs. Ansell in laundry, but years of washing had persuaded them toward a color best described as a memory of pink. Mr. Vale loosened one tape that had twisted and smoothed it between thumb and forefinger. The weave was visible in the lamplight, minute threads passing over and under one another with tireless regularity. Weaving was an ancient solution to a simple question: how might loose fibers be convinced to become a useful surface? The answer was to cross them patiently. Warp held its position, weft traveled back and forth. Neither thread did very much alone, but together they made sails, sacks, shirts, sheets, towels, awnings, bandages, curtains, and the cloth covers of ledgers in which cloth itself was counted. Mr. Vale found this circularity pleasing. His inventory book had a faded blue cover, and when he rested his palm on it, he could feel the fine grain beneath the paper label. He counted the pillowcases in groups, speaking only in his head. 10, 20, 30. The bundles made a low wall along the shelf. Some cases had envelope closures, while older ones were plain tubes with deep hems. He recorded each kind separately because the hotel prided itself on not putting mismatched pillowcases on the same bed, a standard no guest had ever mentioned but which the housekeeping staff maintained with tranquil devotion. When he reached 180, he sharpened his pencil with a small brass sharpener. A pale curl of cedar fell onto the desk like an extremely modest ribbon. At 9:15, the building settled around him. From far below came the soft closing of a dining room door, followed by the rolling hush of a carpet sweeper. The Bellweather after supper was a collection of muffled sounds, water moving through pipes, an elevator stopping level with a subdued bell, a spoon placed in a saucer, a suitcase while crossing 3 feet of bare parquet before returning to carpet. None of these sounds demanded interpretation. They simply marked the hotel's breathing. Mr. Vale drank his tea, which was now warm rather than hot, and opened the drawer of the counting desk. Inside were spare labels, 2 sticks of tailor's chalk, a ball of string, sealing wax no longer used, and a small linen bag containing wooden tally pegs. Before printed inventory sheets, the keeper had counted bundles by moving 1 peg from the bag to a bowl. 12 pegs filled the bowl, 5 bowls made 60. It was a method less vulnerable to interruption than memory, though more vulnerable to a bumped elbow. Mr. Vale sometimes used the pegs for blankets. Their wood was satin smooth from long handling, and each bore a tiny notch. He poured them into his palm and let them settle with a softened clatter, then returned them to the bag. There was comfort in obsolete tools that remained useful. A pencil, after all, was only a narrow stick of graphite wearing a wooden overcoat, and it continued to perform admirably despite the existence of computers. The linen room did have a computer record, but the computer was downstairs, where it hummed brightly and asked for passwords. The clipboard asked only that he avoid spilling tea on it. Shelf C was devoted to bath towels. These were more complicated, because towels came in 3 ages. New towels were thick and plush, with loops that stood upright in dense ranks. Middle-aged towels were softer and more absorbent, their loops relaxed by useful experience. Old towels, still clean and serviceable, had thinned at the edges and were reserved for the small swimming room in the basement or for covering luggage stands during polishing. Mr. Vale assessed them by touch. He did not rush. A towel deserved the courtesy of being judged across its whole surface, not merely pinched at a corner. He spread one over the desk, smoothing it until the woven borders lay straight. It smelled faintly of the steam laundry, warm cotton, soap, and the clean stony scent of softened water. There were no stains, no pulled threads, and only a mild thinning near one end. Middle-aged, he decided, which in towel years was a compliment. He folded it lengthwise, then twice across, pressing each fold with the side of his hand. The result matched its companion so closely that the shelf seemed to absorb it. Towels had been looped for centuries, though industrial terry cloth became common much later than plain linen drying cloths. The loops increased surface area, a technical phrase for the reason a towel could hold so much water while still fitting over one arm. Mr. Vale appreciated technical phrases when they explained ordinary comforts. Surface area accounted for towels, tea leaves, radiator fins, and the pleasing complexity of crumpets. He briefly considered whether crumpets belonged in an inventory tangent, decided that they did, and counted 48 new bath towels, 96 middle-aged ones, and 30 old but respectable examples. The hand towels occupied a shelf at shoulder height, an ideal location for counting. They were arranged 6 across and 8 deep. Mr. Vale could have multiplied 6 by 8 and moved on, but an inventory was not a guessing exercise, even when the guess wore the respectable hat of arithmetic. He touched every folded towel. 6, 12, 18, and onward, confirming 48. Behind the last row he found a sprig of dried lavender. It had probably slipped from one of the sachets Mrs. Ansell placed among the shelves in summer. The stem was gray-green, and the tiny purple heads had faded nearly to dust. When he rolled one gently between his fingers, it released a dry, clean fragrance, sun-warmed hedges, linen on a line, bees conducting business at a considerate distance. Lavender had been associated with washing for so long that its name itself seemed folded. The word came through older languages from a root often linked with washing, though etymologists, sensible people that they were, allowed some uncertainty. Mr. Vale preferred facts with a little uncertainty at the edges. They were less likely to become sharp. He placed the sprig in a saucer beside his mug rather than throwing it away. Then he checked the face cloths, small squares stacked like pale tiles. There were 72, plus 9 bearing a narrow green stripe for the garden rooms. Why the garden rooms required striped face cloths was lost to institutional history. Perhaps a former manager had ordered them specially, or perhaps the supplier had offered a favorable price. The distinction persisted because distinctions, once labeled and shelved, could be surprisingly durable. He entered both totals in their proper columns. Beyond the towels stood a narrow cabinet with glass doors. Its latch gave a satisfying brass click, and inside were the dining linens, napkins, tray cloths, table squares, and long runners for the sideboards. They carried a different scent from the bed linen, a trace of starch and the faint coolness of the cabinet glass. Napkins were bundled in dozens and tied with blue tape. Mr. Vale lifted each dozen onto the desk. Their folds were precise enough to cast tiny straight shadows. A proper table napkin began as a square but spent much of its life as a rectangle for storage or a triangle at breakfast. The hotel had abandoned sculptural napkins after deciding that a napkin's purpose was already honorable. It did not need to impersonate a bird. Mr. Vale counted 21 dozen white napkins, 4 dozen cream, and 11 individual replacements whose shade hovered diplomatically between the two. The unmatched 11 would remain together until a 12th arrived or until time and laundering made the distinction unnoticeable. Beside them lay tea tray cloths embroidered with a narrow border of small leaves. He counted 30, noting that one required mending where a thread had lifted. It was not damage of any consequence, merely a loop asking to be guided home with a needle. Mr. Vale carried the tray cloth to the mending table in the corner. The table stood under a green-shaded lamp, and its drawers contained needles, cards of thread, thimbles, small scissors, beeswax, buttons, and patches cut from retired linen. He was not the principal mender, that was Mrs. Ansell's domain, and her stitches were so even they appeared to have discussed their spacing in advance. Still, he could secure a loose loop. He selected a needle fine enough to pass without widening the weave and chose thread the color of fresh cream. Drawing thread through wax made it less inclined to tangle, an improvement both practical and philosophical. He threaded the needle on the second attempt, which he considered entirely acceptable. The cloth lay beneath his hands, cool and lightly starched. He caught the loose loop from the reverse, eased it back into alignment, and anchored it with 3 small stitches. There was no visible triumph. The leaf border simply became whole again, and this quiet absence of evidence was the point of good mending. For centuries, households had treated cloth as something worth repairing. A frayed edge could be turned, a thin place darned, a torn sheet divided into pillowcases, and a pillowcase eventually demoted to polishing cloth. Textile had a long career path, descending in dignity while increasing in usefulness. Even the final scraps might wrap lavender or pad a drawer hinge. Mr. Vale cut the thread, folded the tray cloth, and placed it atop the counted stack. The clock said 10 minutes to 10. Rain had begun at the high window, not with a dramatic patter but with an even, soft brushing, as though someone outside were cleaning the glass with a very large feather. Shelf D held blankets, and for these Mr. Vale used the wooden tally pegs. The blankets were thick enough that only 6 fit in a stack. Some were cream wool with blue stripes at each end, others were cellular cotton woven into small square pockets. He placed the bowl on the floor, drew one peg from the linen bag for every blanket, and let it fall. The pegs made little wooden knocks, irregular but gentle. Wool had its own atmosphere. Even clean wool retained a warm, grassy scent, a suggestion of sheep without any actual sheep being present to complicate the inventory. Mr. Vale lifted each blanket, felt along the bound edges, and held it briefly toward the lamp to check for thin places. The wool blankets were heavier than they looked, their weight spreading across his forearms like sleeping cats. 24 were in excellent condition. 6 had small darns, neat constellations of matching yarn. 2 were slightly felted from an unfortunate encounter with water that had been hotter than intended. They were still perfectly capable of keeping anyone warm, though now somewhat smaller and more determined. He marked them for staff rooms. The cellular blankets were lighter, their open weave trapping air in thousands of small chambers. Air, when held still, was a useful insulator. This meant that much of a blanket's work was performed by nothing more substantial than pockets of quiet air, a fact so suited to the Bellweather that Mr. Vale paused to enjoy it. He counted 30 cellular blankets and returned the pegs to their bag in groups of 10, confirming the total by touch. Outside, rain continued its mild attention to the window. On the topmost shelf were the counterpanes, accessible by a short library ladder that ran on a brass rail. The ladder had 5 steps, though Mr. Vale needed only 3. He checked the rubber feet, set his mug farther from danger, and climbed at the pace of a person for whom climbing a ladder was merely a vertical form of walking. From the 3rd step he could see the whole linen room, parallel shelves, the square desk, the green lamp, the braided mat, and rows of pale cloth receding into amber shadow. It resembled a small town planned entirely for folded goods. The counterpanes were cotton, woven with repeating diamonds and raised lines. Each had been folded around a sheet of tissue to prevent a hard central crease. Mr. Vale slid them forward one at a time. Their textured surfaces rasped softly against his palms. There were 18 for double beds and 12 narrow ones for singles. At the back lay a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Its label read Summer Spares, 1978, and the handwriting belonged to his predecessor, Mr. Oakes, who had made every capital letter broad enough to shelter beneath. Inside were 4 lightweight counterpanes patterned with small gold squares. They were unmistakably from 1978, not because Mr. Vale was a scholar of textile fashion, but because almost everything in 1978 had apparently been willing to become either gold, brown, or orange. The counterpanes were clean, sound, and rarely used. He counted them anyway. Being unfashionable did not make an object invisible to arithmetic. He retied the parcel with a square knot and slid it into the calm dark at the back. At 10:30, Mr. Vale took a small break. He refilled his mug from the thermos in his satchel and sat on the wooden chair near the radiator. The tea was weaker than the first cup, which was suitable for the hour. The radiator clicked, paused, and clicked again. Its paint had been renewed so many times that the ridges around the valve had softened beneath cream-colored layers. On the wall above it hung a laundry chart showing the meaning of the hotel's stitched corner marks. 1 gray bar meant first floor, 2 meant second, and 3 meant third. A circle indicated dining linen, a small cross indicated kitchen use. Before washable labels, laundries had relied on ink, embroidery, knots, and symbols to return cloth to the proper household. In large towns, commercial laundry marks formed a private written language, tiny and durable, understood by sorters leaning over warm tables. Mr. Vale imagined those old rooms with their steam-clouded windows, wheeled baskets, cakes of soap, and ledgers opened beside weighing scales. Washing had always involved counting, pieces received, pieces boiled, pieces rinsed, pieces returned. Water made cloth heavy, and before mechanical wringers, every sheet required lifting, twisting, and spreading. The modern laundry downstairs performed its cycles with stainless steel certainty. It beeped when finished. Yet even now, hands shook out each sheet and brought its corners together. Machines could wash 100 pieces, but folding still began when one person found an edge and another person found the matching edge. Mr. Vale sipped his tea and watched a little tremor of steam vanish beneath the lamp. He resumed with mattress protectors, perhaps the least poetic residents of the room and therefore among his favorites. They occupied shelf E and padded, quilted stacks. Their purpose was entirely preventative. When successful, nothing happened, and nobody noticed. Mr. Vale considered this an excellent definition of certain kinds of work. The protectors had elastic straps at their corners, which needed checking for fatigue. He stretched each strap gently and listened for the soft complaint of aging rubber. Most returned smartly to shape. 3 responded without enthusiasm and were placed in the mending basket for new elastic. The quilted surfaces were patterned with modest waves, not decorative enough to be admired and not plain enough to seem unfinished. He counted 40 singles, 32 doubles, and 8 for the unusually narrow beds in the attic rooms. Those beds had been built when the hotel accommodated commercial travelers who arrived with sample cases and required little beyond supper, sleep, and an early train. The sample cases were gone, the railway timetable had changed, and the attic rooms now attracted guests who liked beams, sloping ceilings, and the phrase full of character. The mattresses remained narrow. Mr. Vale pictured the protectors traveling upstairs on a trolley in the morning, folded beside sheets and pillowcases, each item assigned to a room before breakfast coffee was poured. He checked his totals twice. Preventative objects deserved accurate records, since their absence was usually discovered at inconvenient moments. Then he aligned the stacks, leaving a finger's width between sizes so the housemaids could lift one without disturbing the next. The curtains were stored in long canvas bags on the lowest rack. These were not everyday stock, but seasonal sets removed, cleaned, labeled, and rested until needed. Mr. Vale knelt again and read the tags: East Wing, rooms 11 to 18, winter, garden rooms, summer, dining room voiles, spare. Each bag held a sleeping interior landscape. There were curtains with narrow green stripes, curtains the color of oatmeal, curtains printed with pale branches, and heavy winter curtains lined in flannel. The bags smelled of canvas and cedar blocks. He did not remove every curtain, for the inventory protocol required checking seals and labels rather than unfolding several hundred yards of fabric across the floor. Instead he inspected the ties and compared each tag to the ledger. The East Wing bag had been entered as 8 pairs and contained 8 pairs. Its weight agreed with this claim in the approximate way familiar to experienced storekeepers. The garden curtains were lighter and gave a faint dry rustle when shifted. Curtains lived an especially uneventful life. They hung. Occasionally they moved in a breeze. They filtered light, framed windows, and collected dust with patience. Yet a room without them often looked unfinished, as if it had forgotten to put on its eyebrows. Mr. Vale had once heard Mrs. Ansell say this and had treasured the comparison ever since. He recorded 6 sealed bags, checked the cedar for scent, and added 2 fresh blocks from the supply drawer. Their redwood left a clean, pencil-like fragrance on his fingers. Near 11, the rain thinned. Individual drops gathered at the top of the window and wandered downward along existing paths, joining one another without hurry. Mr. Vale opened the small ventilator above the pane. Cool night air entered and mingled with the room's stored warmth. It carried wet slate, pavement, and the faint green smell of the courtyard shrubs. The shelves nearest the window held eiderdowns inside breathable cotton covers. No actual eider had been added to the hotel's collection for many years, the name persisted while the fillings had changed to wool or synthetic fiber. Names often outlived materials. A linen cupboard might contain mostly cotton. A silver drawer might hold stainless steel. A tin could be made of aluminum and still be called a tin with perfect confidence. Language, like housekeeping, preferred continuity when it was harmless. Mr. Vale checked 12 covered eiderdowns, pressing each gently to make sure the filling remained evenly distributed. They exhaled with a faint whisper and rose again. One cover bore a handwritten tag, "Extra warm, Room 7." Room 7 had a north-facing wall and a guest who returned every February to read detective novels by the radiator. The stories she read might contain mysteries, but her preferences did not. She liked 2 pillows, weak tea, toast cut thinly, and the extra warm eiderdown. Mr. Vale confirmed that it was ready for its annual duty and set it at the front of the shelf, though February was still months away. There was satisfaction in a comfort prepared well in advance. The last main section contained utility cloths, dusters, polishing squares, glass cloths, floor cloths, and strips used to protect furniture during small repairs. Here the colors changed from white to a muted patchwork. Retired table linen had become soft polishing cloths. Worn sheets had been cut into squares and hemmed with red thread. Green striped cloths were reserved for glass, blue-edged ones for wood polish, and unmarked gray cloths for less particular tasks involving buckets. Mr. Vale counted them in bundles of 20. The dusters were yellow cotton, their surfaces raised into soft ridges. They smelled faintly of beeswax even when freshly washed. The glass cloths were smooth and almost lintless, a quality achieved not through glamour but through a close weave and long use. At the back was a basket of unhemmed pieces awaiting promotion into usefulness. Mr. Vale sorted them by size. Large pieces could cover chair seats, medium ones could be folded around polishing brushes, small pieces might become label ties or padding. Only the narrowest frayed threads were truly finished, and even those sometimes served to tie up the stems of lavender sachets. He found a rectangle from an old dining napkin, its woven bell emblem cut neatly in half. Rather than discard it, he placed it with the mending supplies to use beneath a hot iron. Half a bell could still protect a table. The utility shelves lacked the snowy uniformity of the bed linens, but their variety felt companionable, like a meeting of retired workers who had all found modest second occupations. Mr. Vale now reached the section of the form labeled irregular holdings. This was where the linen room became mildly eccentric. There were 3 circular cloths for tables the hotel no longer owned, 7 armrest covers embroidered with the letter B, a roll of unbleached muslin, 2 yards of green baize, and 1 extremely long piece of white damask whose intended destination had been forgotten. Mr. Vale measured the damask by extending it along the marked edge of the central table. It was 14 feet and 6 inches long. The pattern showed acorns and oak leaves, repeating every 11 inches. Perhaps it had once covered a banquet table assembled from smaller tables. Perhaps it was ordered for a ceremony that changed its mind. Whatever its origin, it remained in excellent condition and had acquired the serene authority of an object that nobody dared cut. He rolled it around a cardboard tube, interleaving tissue at the first turn, and tied it with cotton tape. The green baize was easier. It was kept for relining card tables, though the hotel's 2 card tables had not needed relining in recent memory. Baize was a dense woolen cloth associated with gaming tables, desk tops, and the green doors through which servants once moved quietly in large houses. Its slightly rough nap reduced noise and prevented objects from sliding. Mr. Vale ran his palm over it and enjoyed the way the fibers changed shade when brushed in opposite directions. He entered 2 yards, approximately, because honesty in inventory included admitting when cloth had not been unrolled to the final inch. In a shallow drawer beneath the desk lay the labels. Some were current, printed in clear black type on white card. Others belonged to earlier systems, cream tags with blue borders, round tags with strings, metal-edged labels typed on a machine whose lowercase e sat slightly higher than its companions. Mr. Vale had kept examples because labels told a quiet history of what an institution believed necessary to name. Hot water bottle covers had vanished from modern forms, while duvet covers had appeared. Servants' towels had been crossed out decades ago and replaced by staff towels, then removed when all towels became the same. A label reading Best Guest Linen seemed both confident and tactless. It had been retired in favor of First Set. Mr. Vale sorted a handful of loose cards alphabetically and returned them to their compartments. A storeroom without labels became mysterious faster than one might expect. Identical folded cloth could be a sheet, a tablecloth, or a curtain lining, and the difference often revealed itself only after an inconvenient amount of unfolding. Labels saved motion. They also gave shelves a grammar. Here were nouns in rows, adjectives in smaller type, numbers penciled and revised. He replaced one faded card on shelf C with a new one reading hand towels, standard, leaving the old card tucked behind it for continuity. The new white rectangle looked bright against the gray shelf. In a few months, dust and lamplight would soften it into belonging. By midnight, all physical counting was complete. Mr. Vale sat at the desk to reconcile the totals. This was the slow arithmetic at the center of the evening: stock on hand, pieces in laundry, pieces assigned to rooms, pieces awaiting repair. He added columns with his pencil, carrying small numbers into the margins. The scratching sound was steady and dry. 180 pillowcases in the room, 40 in service, 20 in laundry, 240 altogether. The total matched the previous month. Bath towels showed 2 fewer in the room and 2 more in laundry, which also matched. Flat sheets differed by 1 until he remembered the cloth laid over the pressing table downstairs. He wrote 1 in service and the columns settled into agreement. Figures that matched did not celebrate. They simply stopped asking to be examined. Mr. Vale checked each line with a ruler, then transferred the totals to the blue ledger. The pages were thick and faintly speckled, their corners rounded by years of turning. Earlier entries marched backward in different inks and hands. Mr. Oakes had used green fountain pen ink. Miss Dallow, keeper during the 1960s, had made narrow numbers with open-topped 4s. A wartime page recorded reductions in table linen and an increase in mending cloth. The ledger did not explain the world, it showed how many towels the world had permitted the Bellweather to keep. This limited viewpoint gave it unusual calm. Mr. Vale entered the date, totals, and his initials, then dusted away a crumb of pencil cedar. There remained only the returning laundry trolley. It arrived at 12:20, pushed by Mrs. Ansell, who wore a blue cardigan over her work dress and carried the peaceful warmth of the laundry with her. The trolley's wheels whispered over the corridor runner. Together they brought it inside, where its stacks added fresh soap and heat to the cooler air. Mrs. Ansell poured herself the last tea from the thermos, inspected the repaired tray cloth, and said it would do nicely. This was high praise in the linen room. They checked the trolley against its slip: 20 double sheets, 40 pillowcases, 16 bath towels, 12 hand towels, and 6 dining cloths. Mrs. Ansell counted one side while Mr. Vale counted the other. Their numbers agreed. They did not discuss anything urgent because nothing was urgent. She mentioned that the new soap dissolved better in cool water. He mentioned the 4 gold counterpanes from 1978. They agreed that the counterpanes could remain where they were. Then they shelved the clean pieces, sliding older stock to the front so it would be used first. Warm sheets transferred a little heat to the pine shelves. Pillowcases made soft, compressed sighs as bundles settled together. The towels required an extra inch of space, and Mr. Vale shifted a stack without disturbing its neighbor. When the trolley was empty, Mrs. Ansell wiped its rails with a utility cloth and returned downstairs, taking the mending basket and the 3 tired elastic straps with her. The room was subtly different after the new laundry had been put away. It was fuller, warmer, and scented more strongly of cotton. Mr. Vale made a final circuit, not counting now, simply looking. Shelf labels faced forward. Tapes were tied. Canvas bags were sealed. The lavender sachets rested between stacks where they could do their small fragrant work. He switched off the green mending lamp, and the corner folded into shadow. He closed the ventilator, leaving the rain-cooled freshness inside. At the top shelf, the summer counterpanes waited in their brown parcel. At the bottom, utility cloths waited for polish, water, dust, and all the undramatic substances that made rooms require care. Between them lay the hotel's nights in folded form, sheets for sleepers not yet arrived, towels for baths not yet drawn, napkins for breakfasts whose toast had not yet been made. Preparedness was a quiet kind of hospitality. It did not stand in the lobby or accept thanks. It waited behind a cream-painted door with its edges aligned. Mr. Vale picked up the dried lavender sprig from the saucer and slipped it into the pocket of his waistcoat. His tea mug was empty except for a cool amber crescent at the bottom. He turned off the main light. The corridor lamp entered through the glass panel above the door and spread a pale rectangle across the nearest shelf. In that faint light, the folded linen lost its separate colors and became a landscape of low, soft shapes. The clock continued with its restrained click. A pipe answered once from inside the wall, then became still. Mr. Vale closed the ledger and laid the pencil in the groove at the top of the desk, point facing left as it always did. There would be another count next month. Some numbers would change by 1 or 2, some would remain exactly the same. A towel would move from new to middle-aged without anyone knowing the particular wash in which the change occurred. A sheet would soften. A curtain would continue hanging. The 3 lengths of tired elastic would be replaced, and the tray cloth's repaired leaf would pass unnoticed beneath a teapot. Mr. Vale put on his jacket, eased the door toward its frame, and let the latch meet with a soft and courteous click. Down the long corridor, the lamps made quiet pools on the carpet. He walked through them slowly, carrying the small scent of lavender with him, while behind the door the shelves held their orderly rows, and the cloth cooled by degrees, and the old hotel settled around it, floor by floor, room by room, fold resting upon fold, as the rainwater slipped along the gutters and the night went on being gently counted.